joined by Mike Detillier, as we are every Thursday in hour number 2, albeit under unique, in a very literal sense of the word, as in never before circumstances. Mike D's with us. How are you, Mike D?
I'm good, and you're right about that, Matt. I've been doing this a little bit longer than you,
A little bit.
but it's unprecedented territory that we working in, and for reasons sort of different than maybe in other spots because of this. And you just, I told you at noontime, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And look what's happened from noon until today.
I know.
And until now. You're talking about, I just saw a flash, Disneyland in California closing up over the weekend. I mean, so you have got now the trickle-down effect of all this. And I think all of us want to manage this in a way of understanding what's this all about. And you can get some information, certainly, from it. And I'm a germaphobe to begin with. I'll be honest. So they ain't got to tell me be washing hands and stuff like that. Abear always is on me about it. Man, I shouldn't say that. But I am a germaphobe, put it to you that way.
I understand.
But that there are sometimes people who don't get that. Sometimes there are people in our society who don't understand that. And don't understand what they're told to do or asked to do. And we live in that free society today. And now some of those freedoms are kind of being pulled now, and some of the things away from us the distractions of the world. And that's what the sports world is. We work in the toy department.
Yeah.
Come on. That's our deal. But the toys, are pretty important for a lot of people. It's the distractions in life. And so you see how I knew, let's put it to you this way. As soon as I heard about Rudy Gobert, I knew that was going to be it. That was the big domino to fall. And now everybody's reacting to what Silver did. And I think he made the right choice in the NBA. Pat, college sports is a lot different. There is no one voice. What's relevant in Ann Arbor, in Baton Rouge, in Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, or New York, it's for the first time in my lifetime, is all become relevant together. But there is no unified voice in college sports. At one time, you could say, well, what happens in Michigan doesn't affect Baton Rouge or Gainesville, Florida, or whatever. But I think this has sort of you can hit the dominoes, and all of them are hitting together now. And what I told you at noontime, I'll tell you again. If you think it's something now, this is just the start.
Well, let's look at we'll talk NFL and college football and how all is going to be affected. What we know as of now is that the NFL owners' meetings have been canceled, but the NFL has also said that they're not delaying the start of the league year. So that means free agency will go about, the draft presumably will go about as well. No, go ahead, sorry.
But for now, but here's my thing, and I don't know what's gonna. I'm no doctor in that sort of realm, but one of the things what we don't know is what happens in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks, and how this all evolves. So the NFL is telling you that an event in Nashville that had over 500,000 people last year is going to go on as planned. I don't see how you can be definitive about that today. To make no comment, well, we haven't made that decision yet. Again, what we're hearing and what's reality is two different things. That makes no sense. If that's their claim today, why don't you just don't say anything? The NFL is as stupid as anybody else, and handling big events like we have seen it. If it's been for the flag situation, for the kneeling situation, whatever, are you going to tell me that the NFL handles things really well? That they're reactive to everyone. And the NFL is going to be reactive to what's happened in college sports and what's happened with the NBA. isn't Major League Baseball probably. They haven't said anything that I know of yet. But I think let's sort of wait this out. But the NFL, they're not the smartest group of dudes in the world. Believe me, they make a lot of money, but the way they've handled events has not been, and that's because of the leadership at the top. Bottom line, he'd have been better off keeping his idiotic mouth shut until he got all the facts from people, and then you make that choice. I understand canceling the owners' meetings. And if you look at some of the owners, you understand many of them are, 68 years old or older.
Mike, let me operate, and I guess the hypothetical could play the other way too, Mike. We could wake up in 2 weeks from now and we've got a pretty good hold on this thing. I mean, that's a possibility as well. But let me.
Well, then if that's the case, then you make that decision.
Right.
If you're the NFL, you make that vocal decision then.
But
don't make it today. You don't need to do it today.
Let me ask you.
The owners' meetings you do. I get it.
Sure.
But the NFL draft to say, well, all's well.
Well,
come on, you don't know.
Did they make it? I don't know if they made any statement about the draft. The only thing that I saw was that they're not delaying the start of the league year. So that means free agency will start as it does.
They've leaked it out to different sources
okay.
that draft is going as planned. And my thing is, wouldn't you just be better off keeping your mouth shut?
But you can absolutely play that by ear. But could hypothetically the draft still be held? This was my question. Could without doing the big spectacle in Las Vegas?
Matt, I've talked to so many guys today that have been in this business for a long time. Their deal is, listen, when I first started coaching or I first started scouting, there wasn't this spectacle. It wasn't on television. ESPN was the first people to put it on television. It wasn't, a big thing. And so, yeah, they could do it like that as old time. Now, again, for people who cover it, let me see how gently I can put this. In essence, if you're involved with a station, if it's TV, radio, whatever, and it's an event, how do you handle that part of it? That it's been done for so many years the exact same way. Do you cover it from in studio and do it like you maybe did many, many years ago? But, I've had a lot of scouts, that their deal is, man, they're making a big thing about not having these pro days and individual days. When I first got into this business, it wasn't no pro days and individual days. You worked off the film. What the pro days and individual days did, it got the coaches involved. And it goes to show you that a lot of these directors of certain things maybe don't know as much as you might think they do.
What do you mean?
Here's my deal. If you've watched them for 2 or 3 years, what do you need a pro day for?
Oh, I got you. Yeah, I got you.
What do you need an individual day for? Well, I want to know a little bit about him personally. Well, okay, you're the same guy that told me maybe 5 minutes ago that I can tell you who his best friend is, who his closest guy away from football is, but you can't tell me. So now you're going to tell me you need to know him a little bit closer than that? So again, it's a pea and shell game the NFL has done, and that's to get the coaches more involved. Because there are a lot of coaches today with the chalk in their hands, okay? They got the last say. Now, that GM might say, I'm the final voice. Yeah, you're the final voice when that head coach screams it in your ear. That's who I want. And he probably knows the top 100 players very well. I think the crux of the draft is, in most part, of what happens after that. That's where you really have to rely on your scouts and scouting department to give you that information. That's where a head coach, he might not be familiar with Pete Guerrero from Monmouth University in New Jersey. You're going to have to tell him about it, a little bit about it. So that is part of the game today, and we don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks, a month, or whatever into that part. But my thing is sort of distasteful is that the NFL, through their own circuits, sort of has leaking this out. Well, everything's going to be as planned in Las Vegas. We have no plans to change everything else. And, we've heard this song and dance before. So I think you have to reevaluate situations. If you someone in charge and you've ever been in charge of anything, and luckily for me it has happened, that you got to reevaluate and be smart enough to know when to talk and when not to. And you got a league that is led by a guy that, to me, he's got to be told what to do every step of the way by certain owners who have tremendous say in how the NFL is run. But this has become a spectacle.
Yeah.
In Nashville, it started the Monday before, actually started the Sunday before the draft on the Thursday. And it's a huge event in a 96-hour frame, even before you make the first pick.
We got Mike Detillier with us here for the full hour, as we do every Thursday here in hour two. Mike, what we learned last hour from Robert Munson out at LSU is that in spite of these championships being canceled, the teams are still allowed to practice, and that's at the discretion of every coach. So LSU football is continuing through their spring football practice. They practiced today. So let's check through a couple of the headlines from the week. First, and I guess most notable, of course, would be Peter Parrish's suspension. Any reaction there, Mike?
I knew a little bit about it. I knew he wasn't involved for a while. And so, he's a guy that he had a year under his belt. I think, Coach O's going to have to make this decision a little bit later. But you're going to have to think about it. What if something happens to Miles physically? Are you going to go with one of the two freshmen?
Mm-hmm.
You really have no other way to go at this point. And, he's not the only guy like that, but, he's not the only coach like that. But one of those scholarships that are available, do you look around after the spring and say, maybe I can bring in a veteran just in case as an insurance policy? So you're going to have to think about that, and I don't, who knows what happens with Peter Parrish as we go on here, but it certainly is the one. If you look across the board, that quarterback touches the ball virtually almost every play, if not every play. Only the center touches it, for sure every play. But it's something that I think Coach will have to think about. And I will say, I talked to him for a short time. They had a prayer breakfast a few mornings back, and he really spoke up about how well Miles is doing. And so that to me, one of the things with Coach, he doesn't, when he starts to talk about how good somebody looks, you pay attention. He's not one to throw the superlatives at people. That we've learned that throughout the years. He's not one to do it, and he really was patting Miles on the back pretty good. Put it to you that way.
Who else offensively, Mike, are you looking at? It's only been 2 spring practices, and now obviously our contact is limited. Who else are you looking at in this spring as an interesting test case?
I think we know what Terrace Marshall and we know what Jamar can do.
Mm-hmm.
I think an expanded role for Racing McMath, who's a big, thickly built receiver who's got some scoot after the catch, and he can help out on special teams. He's a good special teams player, too. I think his role is certainly going to be expanded. And Trey Palmer, this is his opportunity now to step in. And why you need those guys to step up, look at the eligibility of Jamar, Terrace, and McMath.
Mm-hmm.
What happens after 2020? That's why I think, you'll see the 2 freshman receivers get a lot of work. You want to win in 2020, and you're worried about that, but also you have your eye down the road, too, also with that. But I think a more expanded role for Racing McMath. Can Jamal Pettigrew stay healthy? And that was something I spoke to Joe Brady last year, and he told me, man, if he can stay healthy, we could have something. He's a big guy, can catch the football pretty well, and that sort of thing. Now he's going to have some competition when Gilbert hits the scene here, but I don't know how much you'll be able to tell about offensive line play. Because, again, that's 5 guys working as one.
Sure.
You have some new elements there at the center position, inside. I think the one guy Ed has talked about every time he's spoken, Anthony Bradford.
Hmm.
Listen to all these little snippets. And I know we had him on a few weeks back, and he first guy out of his mouth was Bradford. And and so kind of knowing how he speaks and what he's trying to tell you, he is telling you, hey, this Bradford guy is really good, really, really good at that guard position. And he's holding off a guy that, arguably he was one of the top guards in the country. He was the top guard in the state, certainly,
Yeah.
In Cardell, and he's coming off the injury. And so we'll find out a lot about that. But for me, I think it's to watch the development of an Anthony Bradford at guard, to see what happens with an expanded role with Racy, who is a big receiver. You stand up next to McMahon. He's not a small guy. I mean, he's pieced together, and he's got some size on him, and certainly the speed element of Trey Palmer. I think the running back situation will work itself out. One of them will break from the pack. I know we talked about it last year.
Yeah.
One of the backs will break from the pack. Now, none of us thought it would be Clyde at that level, the way he was able to do it, and Ed has been certainly open in the fact that that ability to catch the football is important in this offense. And in essence, what he's trying to tell you is, I wish the other three guys could catch it a little bit better.
Yeah.
He's not telling you that, but actually, I don't have to write the story for you. I mean, he's actually sort of doing it for you. On defense, McClendon, and Ed had told me this during the winter months. I don't know if it was November, December, about, we're watching him work out, and John Robinson walks up and says, listen, TK, he's got to play on the other side of the football. And he said, we started playing him at defensive end. He was like, hey, Mike, I think he's really good there. He's a really good athlete. He's long-armed. He's got that ability to come off the snap real fast. And so I would be really – because I think the big man part of it, if it's Bradford or McClendon, I think we know enough about the inside guys at LSU. It's the edge guys. And what he's talked about, BJ, again, I think he's done 4 press conferences. 3 of the 4 he's brought up the freshman. 3 times of the 4 press conferences he's done in recent weeks or a radio show.
Mm-hmm.
I think he might have done it with T-Bob and Jordy. And he's brought up BJ in that particular. Again, Ed's not one like that to tell you about something, but in essence what he's telling you is, hey, listen, that guy's pretty doggone good. And also Gay, also the JUCO player, who you can see the way he's pieced together. He's built for that 4-3 defensive end. And his comment of, man, we might have to look around for a grad transfer linebacker. Okay, guess who he's talking about? And that's Jabril Cox. Come on, it don't take a rocket scientist for that, too. And I think every school in the country would want Jabril because of the fact, and I told you this last week, he would have been, I think, a top 100 pick had he decided to come out for the 2020 NFL draft. He's a guy that you really like because not only does he play to run well, and he can flow very well from east to west, he can also cover. And, he was a safety in high school. He was a quarterback. I mean, he played all over the board. So, in essence, what he's telling you is that Cox pickup is pretty big if you can get it, because he adds a guy that when he walks on that campus, because I've talked to the people at North Dakota State, when he got there as a redshirt freshman, not his freshman year, but his redshirt freshman year, there were coaches on the staff that said he was the best player on the field as a redshirt freshman on a team that has dominated, smaller college football. That's saying a lot of Jabril Cox. And so I think he's certainly in the crosshairs of the type of guy that you would want to bring in. They got a lot of talent in the secondary. I think that's an area where, because of injuries with Harris and also with Hampton playing baseball, and he's got a back injury too,
right?
That we won't see the full Monty with that until the summertime. But I think they feel pretty good about their secondary. I think they would like to get help at the linebacker position. And to be honest with you, if you got 3 scholarships left and you figure Cameron's going to get one of them. Looks as though grade-wise he's making that progress to do it. You would have two left. What to do with those two scholarships? If Cox wants to come here, he got one, Jack. I'll give it to you right there. It's the last one. Would it be at a quarterback position because you don't have a lot of experience there at this point? Or would you feel comfortable? Matt, would you feel comfortable? If you're talking about a true freshman stepping in here?
Nope.
No. So you would try to get a veteran, a guy who has take some snaps and has been a starter. Maybe it just hasn't worked out for you. And you never know, and that's something he sort of explained to me. You never know who becomes available at that point, after the spring. Because Joe Burrow was not a guy pre-spring people were talking about. It was after the spring game when it became obvious that Haskins was the guy at Ohio State. That's when it became the bullseye on Joe to go out and get him and how good of a player he was.
Mike D., we had anticipated it. It became official today that the Green Bay Packers have released Jimmy Graham. Should the Saints kick the tires there?
Nope.
Why not?
Okay, what has he done? Okay, people say he didn't fit in Seattle with Russell Wilson. Okay, he goes to Green Bay. He's got Aaron Rodgers. When did he fit in there?
I don't know.
Isn't the product Drew Brees that – listen, Jimmy was a very good football player, and I take nothing away from him. But wasn't a big part of that, Drew? So
could it work again?
Not like that. And I don't know that Jimmy still wants to get paid at a high level at that tight end position. I don't know. The Saints have a guy like that, don't they? And Jared Cook? Isn't he like Jimmy, in a lot of ways? So am I going to spend money again on a 30-something-year-old tight end who's had knee issues, back issues? He hasn't produced from a number standpoint big numbers ever since he left New Orleans. Come on, he hasn't been hurt every year.
Right.
What's happened there? And I think some of that certainly has to do with some of the injuries he's had, but it was such a great fit, Matt.
It was. You're right.
What that fit, and that goes to show you, and I say this every year, there are probably 4 or 5 guys in a draft that no matter where they end up, they're going to play at that same level. Everybody else is a little bit of a fit of how well it fits. And Jimmy was a great fit in New Orleans, and Drew knew how to get him to football, and they worked so much on the timing, especially short yardage, red zone, kind of basketball-type plays to make it work. But, I don't know that Jimmy wants to, come here at a lower salary level, and I think that will be – listen – he ain't winning the electoral college here. All you need is one. All you need is one to cut you that check at a pretty high level. Now, the sales point for Jimmy now is getting a little stale of selling that. Because now, again, as I've said, he didn't do it in Seattle with Russell Wilson. And people say, well, it wasn't the right fit. And I think part of that is true. But I think also part of it is he's not the same player anymore. And it was a great fit in New Orleans. Matt, you want me to tell you a Diliberto story that teams up with
please. Matt, we got to make this a regular part of our visits. I want a Buddy D story every week. And you said you got them A to T.
I could do this until I'm 100 and still not finish.
Write the book, Mike. I told you write the book. You don't have to publish it, but write the book so I can read it.
No. Listen, if I write the book, it got to be published, so I ain't writing it. And
Okay.
That's too much in there. One of the things, we talked about doing things the old way. And this is ancient history for some people, but because it happened 50 years ago. 1970 draft. Saints are pretty much, still a very young team at that point in time. But they're losing. And so to kind of help educate the public, is how the Saints put it, they invited certain members of the media to come watch how the draft process worked in 1970. And Buddy told me, and Pete Finney was also one of them there, and he said, they would announce the picks, and it would come through a voice box. They had a little box from New York, and, they'd make the pick at that point. And the Saints picked Ken Burrow that year in round one, a wide receiver from Texas Southern, who's a really good player, but never with the Saints. He was a really good player with the Houston Oilers. He had a bad turf toe injury his rookie year, and J.D. was upset with him. He thought he wasn't tough. And so he dealt him off the next year to the Oilers, and he became a really, really good football player. And I think the last guy to wear 00. I think Ken Burrow is the last guy that I can remember wearing 00 on a uniform. And so as it, the Saints make the pick with Burrow, and so Diliberto and Finney and Bob Rossler, a couple other guys sitting around. And it comes down to the Oakland Raiders pick. And he said, over the box, they hear the Oakland Raiders select Raymond Chester. And Buddy said, I'm pretty sure they said fullback, tight end. That's how they announced Raymond Chester back then from Morgan State.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, when they would make that selection, they had these magnetic pieces, and the names were on the pieces. So they would just sort of slide it in, and they'd put it on the board, and you could look straight up and down with it. And he said, every other pick, they'd grab the magnetic board and they'd put it on there, grab the board, put it on there with the name.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, they make the pick, Raymond Chester. And he said, Vic Swink, who was the general manager of the Saints back then, he's looking around that board, and there ain't no Raymond Chester up there. So he says all of a sudden he sees him write in Raymond Chester on the piece of paper, and he slides it in. The coach for the Saints, Tom Fears, sees it and says, hey, why don't we have a deal for Raymond Chester? He said, well, we just don't. So he slid it in there, and he said, a little bit of an argument started between the two guys. You mean to tell me that the Raiders pick a guy and he ain't on our board in round one?
Mm.
And he said, man, Fears grabbed a couple pieces of paper, and he walks out the room. Come to find out, Fears actually walked to a telephone in another room and called up his good friend John Madden. They knew one another, were close friends, and he called John, and he said, John, tell me about this Raymond Chester. He said, we don't even have him on our board. He said, well, we have him ranked as the 11th best player in this draft class. And we're not sure where he's going to play, because he played fullback, halfback, tight end, linebacker at Morgan State. But he said, we're looking at him probably as a tight end more than anything. And, he said he's 6'4" and he's 240 pounds. So when Fears walks back into the room, and he's boiling now. I mean, he's like a bald owl, dude. I mean, he is hot. And he tells Swink, what is this thing again? Explain to me why. And he said, why do you keep bringing this up? He wasn't on our board. The only thing I can tell you is if he's not on our board, he can't play. And Fears said, so you telling me that the Raiders and their success, and we don't have them on the board, but they don't know what they're talking about? He said, that's exactly what I'm telling you. But he said within seconds, Fears had jumped across the table and grabbed Swink by the neck. And he said he was trying to choke him. He was banging his head against the table. And Buddy, I was 2 feet away from him, and he said, I didn't like Swink anyway. So he said, Fears could have banged his head all day long. It didn't really matter to me. But he said, all of a sudden now there's a couple of the scouts that he said half-heartedly sort of broke them up, into the deal. He said they screaming and hollering at one another. He said, I see another guy run out of the room. He calls John Meekum, who's at a hotel not far away. And he said, next thing you know, within minutes, Meekum's there. And he said, guess what? Our draft day experience ended that. We didn't even get out of round one. They escorted every media guy out of there. But that goes to show you, this is 1970 now, and there is no visual part of the draft. It is coming over a voice box. And he said after the third round, there was a member of the Saints crew that when they would put the name up, he would say it. So they weren't even announcing it in New York.
Oh, wow.
He said, they would put the name up and they would show it to everybody. He said it was almost like on a little screen, and then they would tell you, so-and-so got picked in round 3, so-and-so got picked in round 4. But the crux of the story is you can see the mismanagement of this football team.
No wonder they didn't win a playoff game for 40 years.
Yeah, and so but that was one of Buddy's favorite stories that he got to see fears and Tom was normally a very mild-mannered guy. He said, he was baked that day. He was absolutely baked that day. And Swing got a couple of knots on top of his head. This is coming from my friend Gay Culverhouse. Gay was at one time the owner of the Tampa Bay Bucks. Her dad was the original owner of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And she sent me a text just a few minutes ago that and she's connected now. She's worth almost $1 billion. And her deal is that the owners of the XFL teams and Vince McMahon have had some long talks, and some of the people involved with the XFL are looking at possibly suspending the season for a few weeks. And so I knew eventually. Now, again, it's going to be to convince Vince, who's got a lot of money riding, a lot of TV time involved, if this does happen. But she said we're well down that highway. So it'll be interesting. But that word is coming out of Florida that many people involved with the XFL are pushing to suspend the season now and catch this back up, sometime either in April or in May.
Okay.
So, again, the trickle-down effect, and we're seeing it now across the board, has hit, if you want to call it professional football, but with the XFL. And I think that they'll have an announcement very quickly because, remember, the games are this weekend.
Yeah.
So if you're going to make that decision, you better make it pretty quick since we Thursday today. But I think very quickly you'll have an announcement from the XFL. And from what Gay is telling me, it looks as though they're certainly walking down that road to possibly suspend this for a couple of weeks and then try to pick it back up once we get a better handle on the virus outbreak.
All right, Mike, let's get to, actually, we got a couple of minutes real quick. Let me get to these. Benny Logan, Eddie Kennison joining LSU staff. Thoughts?
Listen, I like former players being involved. A lot of times you talk to an assistant coach that they've never played. They've maybe played the high school level or in the college level, but you're talking about professional players. And Benny Logan was a good player. And, he's from that Pete Jenkins branch of things. And, Pete teaches you a certain way, technically. And so I think that was a good addition. I actually spoke with Benny back in December at an event. And he talked about, possibly one day being involved. And so that was the first sort of hint of it. But, he's a guy that played in the NFL. He wasn't the biggest, fastest, strongest guy, but, man, well-taught. And he can help from a technique standpoint. And that's such a big part of the game that a lot of people don't talk about. You can talk about somebody's size and speed and how strong and how fast they are. But, the technical part of the game is sometimes overlooked by the regular folks of the world. And Benny can help there. Interesting with Eddie in that position, exactly what he is going to do at LSU.
Yeah, I know it's sort of an off-field role, but, man, he's been successful in his post-football life, and he's a great dude.
In a lot of things.
Yeah.
Just not one thing.
Yeah.
Eddie's been successful. Yeah. And I do know one thing. Eddie's a guy that's pretty driven.
Yeah.
About what he does into that mark. And you know what? You can still walk in a room somewhere and, mom and dad and say, this is Eddie Kennison.
Oh, yeah.
And people, yeah, well, I remember when you played at LSU, or I remember you played with the Rams, or I remember when you played for a little while with the Saints, and that sort of thing. And Eddie had people don't remember, Eddie had a long NFL career.
Yeah. Mike,
he stretched that out.
I got 10 seconds. We got to bounce here at this hard break. I appreciate you as always, man. Wash your hands, Mike. We'll talk soon.
Always do that. Thank you, brother.
See you. That's Mike D.